Hello there, a very good morning, and welcome to another edition of the Talk of the Town. Joining us this morning is cybersecurity expert Asela Waidyalankara. Asela, now, when we speak about Sri Lanka entering the digital age or expanding Sri Lanka's economy into a digital economy, digitizing pretty much everything that we do in this country as an answer to the crises that we're facing and also looking forward towards developing Sri Lanka. Cybersecurity is something that, at the moment, we're quite lacking. The best example for this being the recent ransomware or the hack, call it what you will, on government, the government websites, of course, and the massive loss of public data that happened through that. Asela, what really happened? Why is this happening? And is there a way that we can move forward from this and fix this issue?
Good morning, Shalan, and thank you for having me. And good morning to everyone listening in on your morning drive. Very important questions. And I think, first of all, Sri Lankans' journey in digitization has been maturing ever since COVID hit and we were in virtual lockdown and we started working from home. There's been a tremendous shift in the way Sri Lankans use digital platforms, use digital payments, and overall their outlook towards digital has improved. And it is based on that wave of digitization that the government also wants to ride on and make sure that there's obviously less corruption when there's digitization, but also more efficiency, and it's cost effective. So with that in mind, there are certain initiatives that the government is undertaking, and we see those coming to light perhaps next year. But more importantly, as you mentioned, similar to the fervor that we have in having having digitization, cybersecurity needs to go hand in hand with that, because it's always better to have cybersecurity from the ground up when you're doing a digital project or you're doing a digital initiative versus situations like we saw very recently with the government email being compromised, where once the situation does occur, you have to spend a considerable amount of time and resources to try and fix that problem. And that is, of course, problematic. I would like to say that the problem of how we can go around trying to fix this, there's three pillars that it rests on. And in the world of cybersecurity, we call it people, process, and technology. And as you can see, technology only plays 1/3 of the role. There are other two key important elements, that is people, meaning people with capacity, subject matter experts, and processors. Processors could be international standard processors, for example, like ISO, or processors that are aligned to a country's law. In terms of, for example, Sri Lanka just very recently, last year, passed a Personal Data Protection Act, which is basically looking at making sure the citizens' data is more protected by businesses as well as the state. So these are some of the concerns people would have when they're trying to transact with government digital systems or government digitization programs. But it's not always the case, because let me take an example of something that worked very well. For the last 1 year plus, we had the Fuel app. Now, at no point did you hear the Fuel app being compromised. And mind you, the Fuel app was a very large database. It had the NIC basically tied to the current vehicle that you're driving. And that was a very important piece of data. And at no point did we hear that there was a compromise or there was a mismanagement of this data, simply because the model that was followed. And that was a PPP model, a public-private partnership, meaning that the development and the digital infrastructure was provided by the private sector, a telco company, as well as a software company, a system integrator, as we call it. And the policy direction was provided by the government and the minister concerned. And of course, the political will came and the policy came from there, and it worked perfectly. And why, to answer the question, why something like that didn't have some of the incidents that we're seeing now in other government infrastructure, is I go back to the same point I mentioned: people, process, and technology. When you have a especially a telco, which has one of the best, I would say, world-class security operations centers in the region. And because of that, by default, that data was well protected within those data centers, and therefore we didn't read about a breach like this. Whereas when the government tries to perhaps do these things on its own, manage these situations on its own, lack of people, lack of subject matter experts, lack of the processes that I speak about in how you take this data on if there's an incident or some sort of cybersecurity breach, how do you make sure that you back up that data? How you make sure that people can use your platforms after that incident? So those are some of the pertinent questions that we need to answer, and the answer comes from policy, governance, transparency. And if you don't have these three things, no amount of technology and no amount of spending money, as I say, spending money buying boxes, is going to solve this problem. And we're going to continuously hear about cybersecurity breaches in the government sector. Therefore, it's my personal appeal, please look at it at not as a technology problem or an IT problem, consider it as a policy problem and a governance problem. And if you look at it that way and you deal with it that way, certainly government digitization programs will be successful. Don't forget, come next year, we have the digital NIC program coming. That's a very big project that will potentially disrupt how the state sector functions because it's modeled after other. Now, that's all very good, but also I urge, let's look at the cybersecurity from the ground up so that we don't have constraints that are brought up by any breaches or unforeseen incidents like the ones we read about today.
And that's a wrap of the Talk of the Town for today. It's back to the morning fix on Yes 101.